So it is time to go for the penultimate round of a very, very long F1 season. So let's get into it. The weekend got underway in FP1 and it was a surprise name at the top of the timesheets with Ferrari's Charles Leclerc top of the session. In a very strange session indeed. Many drivers was off the road with a new gravel strip at the end of the curbs to avoid the same track limit and puncture drama we had last year. Oscar Piastri tested this new track to the limits as he went off the road into the gravel and managed to keep his McLaren going. The same was for his championship contender Lando Norris, who also went off the track. Lando Norris, of course, was out of the World Championship following Verstappen clinching it in Las Vegas last weekend. And he wasn't the only one off the road, as Alpine's Esteban Ocon went off the track too. He has had a pretty struggling couple of weekends now as he's been very much outpaced by his teammate Pierre Gasly. In sprint qualifying though, Guan Yu Zhou was out of qualifying in 19th place. That was not really a surprise. If anyone is wondering why I call him Zhou for, it's because Logan Sargent does. But Perez was out, what a surprise, along with Tsunoda, Ocon, Zhou and Colapinto. All out in the first spot of sprint qualifying, but Sergio Perez wasn't a shock at all because, well, he's always out. That's his new house, in fact. Alonso was knocked out by a late lap by Pierre Gasly's striking pink Alpine, and he was along with Albon, Bottas, Stroll and Magnussen, who could have got through but got impeded on his early first sector. But in the fight for pole on the early runs, it was Lando Norris ahead of Oscar Piastri with George Russell and Verstappen and Hamilton rounding out the top five. But this is SQ3 and you know Lewis Hamilton's going to bottle it. Lando Norris bottled pole but managed to hold on by 63 thousandths. Yes, 63 is George Russell's race number, so it had to be that margin, and he was second on the grid ahead of Piastri. Hamilton slid to 7th with the Ferraris 4th and 5th, and it's time for the sprint. Lando Norris did actually get a good launch. What? Yeah, he did. Lando Norris actually maintained the lead. Let's just be quiet for a few seconds. That's like an almighty shock. And even maintains it through the opening corners, with Russell actually losing second to Piastri. Verstappen getting a bad start. That's also a big shock. Clearly the sprint is going to be full of surprises, and things we thought would be normal clearly weren't going to be. And that was definitely shown up by Sergio Perez. When the green light was at the end of the pit lane, he didn't go. So he got overtook by Franco Colapinto at pit exit and was wondering why he wasn't being good in the Red Bull. People wonder why he's not going to be in Red Bull next year. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc were getting ready for 2025, as they were both behind their much, less experienced teammates. And actually, no, that's a lie in Charles Leclerc's case. Carlos Sainz is more experienced. But you'd still see Leclerc is quicker than Sainz. But anyway, Oscar Piastri won, because at the very last corner, at the very last straight, in redemption for potentially Brazil and all the outrage that was there, Oscar Piastri was let through by his teammate Lando Norris to win the sprint. Now we go to actual qualifying for the Qatar Grand Prix, which was pretty uneventful. Albon was knocked out despite Tsunoda not even improving, with Lawson, Hülkenberg, Colapinto and Ocon all out in the first part of qualifying, with Ocon shocked to be well and truly slower than his teammate. Remarkably, for the second weekend in a row, Guan Yu Zhou outqualified Valtteri Bottas by a mammoth 0.3 of a second. Clearly, Valtteri Bottas has had enough, following his action from the Sauber F1 team, and his otherwise brilliant season is going to end in a pretty sorrowful state. In the early runs for Q3, George Russell was at the top for Verstappen and Leclerc and Hamilton, but Verstappen stuck at it up and got to pole position. They managed to get that Red Bull and stick it up places that it didn't belong and managed to get all the way to the top, just ahead of George Russell with Lewis Hamilton a low P6 for Mercedes. Following a shock one-place grid penalty, Russell inherited pole position, but fumbled the start just like his fellow British driver Lando Norris, who actually made a brilliant start and went for the lead of the race, but didn't manage to do it. But there was a crash at the back involving Ocon and Franco Colapinto, who were both out, and it was yet another shunt for Williams. And as has just been announced, Esteban Ocon is leaving Alpine before the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, so his last ever F1 race for the Alpine F1 team, a team he's been with since the very beginning of Alpine, ends with a crash at the first corner. Williams have never had two cars took out at the first corner for any F1 race ever. But that run would not end today, as the Alex Albon Williams wasn't stranded and managed to keep on going. However, who was getting stranded and in his own misery of a pit and depth of absolute torture every single weekend was Lewis Hamilton, who had a 5-second penalty for a false start, and jumping the start effectively didn't matter anyway because he was down to 9th after a dreadful start. Meanwhile, Liam Lawson was fighting hard again for RB, and as Perez looked set to be replaced after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Lawson wasn't doing good enough job, really, in my opinion, to get the seat next year and had a collision with Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin. Meanwhile, nothing happened for 20 laps until Lando Norris was under investigation for speeding under a yellow flag. Max Verstappen was determined to win his 9th win of the year and was determined to beat Lando Norris to do so. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton was in big trouble and he had a puncture, and that was not good at all. Hamilton, of course, had his tyre cut off at the opening lap of last year's edition of the Grand Prix. But this time he wasn't the only one, as Carlos Sainz, the driver he's replaced the next gen Ferrari, which now looks like a terrible decision, also had a puncture and a big trouble too. Meanwhile, Oscar Piastri pitted just before a safety car, so lost out to Charles Leclerc. Meanwhile, Hamilton's pain was not done yet, as he now had a stop-and-go penalty for speeding under the pit lane. Meanwhile, Lando Norris had a 10-second time penalty, and the safety car restart got underway. Lando Norris put the pressure on Max Verstappen but couldn't take the lead, but Sergio Perez crashed before it even got going, as he had a power related issue in his Red Bull. Meanwhile, Nico Hulkenberg's what turned from a brilliant weekend went from bad to worse, as he spun off late on as the safety car restarted, and that meant he was out of the race, as his final couple of races with Haas, a team that brought him back into F1, should I say, in 2023, come to an end. But Max Verstappen managed to win the race with a brilliant drive at the end of the last lap and managed to do a brilliant win enough. That means that he's now 80 points ahead of Lando Norris with 1 round to go. Any more pain and the gap would be even bigger than the fight with Sebastian Vettel in 2018. Oh yeah, that title fight. But that's for another video and definitely for another day to talk about that. Next week though, I'll be doing loads of post-season content, so be sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy this video to make sure you don't miss it, and I'll see you next time on F1 Hub.